So thanks for the feedback that I got on the trading dependent markets video. Hopefully the title hasn't changed between now when I've recorded this video or when you're watching this video. But the trading dependent markets video, if you haven't seen it, was talking about the title race and how you could actually trade the title race and the English Premiership football season, and how you could profit from it by taking a view on how matches were being played and so on. So I wanted to follow up on that because, one of the questions and the issues that sort of cropped up with this sort of thing is like, who's going to win the title and what games are left and how is that going to influence the title race, because that's part of the trade effectively. And I thought I'd show you a spreadsheet. Now I've got 450 billion spreadsheets on many different aspects of pretty much everything that you can think about in each individual sport, and football is one of my favourite markets because that's where I started, sort of 35 years ago or however long. It's that long ago that I've completely forgotten how long ago it was. But let's have a look and understand what I'm looking at and why and how, but also how that would influence what you would do in terms of the trading opportunity. Because in the previous video, what I was talking about was how matches are staggered and that certain matches start on certain days and other teams will play in front of that, and therefore the emphasis shifts to the next match and how that affects things from there. And the core question that you should ask obviously here if you're going to be trading the title race is, what chance do individual teams have of winning the title? So let's have a look at this spreadsheet that I've got on the screen behind me. I'm going to wiggle my mouse around and move in certain areas so that you can understand what's going on. But basically I've got effectively the top six here. Now, some people may argue about who are the top six teams, but generally accepted, these are the top six teams. But what you can see on here is that we've got it ranked according to a number over here. In fact, I should have re-ranked this because there's a couple of matches that have passed since I resorted the spreadsheet. So some of this, the league table over on the left-hand side here, is going to be slightly out, but it's not going to detract too much from the purpose of what we're going to be talking about in this video. But you can see we've got the teams listed across here, we've got the league table over here, and then you can see the results that have occurred between each of the teams, and from that you can begin to pick up a pattern of how the rest of the season is likely to play out. So if we start at the top with Manchester City, if we look at their home record, you can see that apart from that loss to Crystal Palace, where there was that absolutely stunning Andros Townsend goal, you can see generally that they performed pretty well at home throughout the season. So whether it was the top teams or the bottom teams, they've performed pretty well. And obviously they performed pretty well against most of the lower teams, which is pretty much what you'd expect. There's no stunning insight to have available there. The number that you can see next to here is how long ago that match was played, because obviously that does bear relevance. So if you look at teams that have had a change of manager or brought in new players, then you should expect that to influence the results. But what you can see here is that in fact City have been winning fairly recently against the top teams. So as a consequence, that puts them in a pretty good position because they've played home and away some of the top teams in the division. You can see here that they haven't played Man United away. And if we look at the scores that were clustered around that area, most of these were played some time ago, apart from Chelsea here. But you can see they drew away to Liverpool, they won at Spurs, lost to Chelsea when Chelsea were playing a bit better. They won at Arsenal, they drew at Wolves, but you can see here that there's a gap against Man United. So if you look at the remaining matches that are likely to be played, they've got a home match against Spurs, an away game against Man United within that top six. But you can see they've got some home games left down here against some lower level teams, and they've got quite a few away games against some of the teams towards the bottom of the division. So you can see this is where most of the gaps are. Now if we ask the question of can Liverpool win the league, let's have a look at the matches that they have remaining and what their form is like overall. So, if you look at City, they've lost a couple of, well, they've lost 3 matches, but a couple of unexpected ones. And they weren't, in the too distant past. And if we look at the number of goals that they score against bottom teams, they seem to score quite a few, but then obviously as we go up the league, and that's what you'd expect, they tend to score a little bit less. But typically their away form hasn't been really, absolutely fantastic. It's been good, but not amazing. And if we switch to Liverpool, you can see they lost to City, but you can see that generally their form's been pretty consistent right across the entire league. So whether they're playing top division, clubs at the top of the division or teams at the bottom, it's been pretty consistent. But you can see there are huge gaps here against teams that are near the bottom of the division. So if you think about it hypothetically in terms of the number of points that they could pick up, Liverpool have obviously got the same number of away games, or roughly the same number of away games left as City. But if you look at the number of matches that Liverpool have against lower teams away, it's slightly more favourable. So you could expect them, especially given their away form, to pick up a few points there. Home form for both teams, apart from that fluky win by Palace at the Emirates. Is it the Emirates? I think they call it. No, what do they? Because I always think of City's ground as Main Road, funny enough. But obviously, excluding that, their home form is pretty good. But if you look at Liverpool's form, then it's pretty superb, really. And, there aren't many gaps or things for concern in there. But they've still got to play a few of those home teams. So their season will be defined by making sure they win those away games, making sure they get a result against Spurs and Chelsea at home. So probably a good time to meet Chelsea. Difficult to tell with Spurs because if we look at Spurs' form, you can see it's a bit of a mixed bag, really. They seem to do really well outside of that top six, home and away. They don't seem to have a problem winning games, and they seem to be scoring a lot of goals. But if you look at that cluster of activity near the top of the division, you can see that it's a really mixed bag. So, do City and Liverpool deserve to be at the top? Most definitely. And if you look at some of the other teams, you can see that they've not got as good a sort of set of results against teams that you would typically expect. But also, if you look at Spurs' season, they still have to play some of the top teams away from home. So that's going to necessarily have an impact on what they do. Now, if we look at United, obviously there's a story behind United this season in that obviously Jose Mourinho left after a string of bad results. Solskjaer has come in and has performed miracles, or at least allowed the team to play the way that they get the best out of them. So the interesting thing about this is if you look at the results since Mourinho left, you can see that a lot of the results that we have, so anything that's a zero, so for example, if I look at something that's a zero, you can see here that was played within the last month. 1 is a month ago, 2 is 2 months ago. So you can see actually that there's a cluster of 1s and 0s towards the lower end of the league table. So in fact, there was a good run of results for a new manager to be appointed. Probably, if you look at that objectively, you would probably say that you would have expected United to win those games. Would they have won them under Mourinho? Perhaps, perhaps not. But nonetheless, they were a favourable run of games. And if you look at the number of games that have been played at the higher end of the division, you can see that obviously there was that win against Spurs away, but there are quite a few gaps there, quite a few games left to be played against the top teams, and that will be what defines the season. So if I was the United board, which I'm not, of course, I would wait a lot longer before deciding whether to appoint Ole Gunnar Solskjaer as the manager, because you can see there's still a lot to be done there, and it's those matches that will define their season for them. Chelsea, you can see here, reasonable home form, but they've made a right mess of everything away, so that's not going to win you the title. And if you look at Arsenal, they've done pretty much the same thing, curiously. They've generally had pretty good home form, but pretty poor away form over the course of the season, lost to a number of different teams all over the entire division. But by laying out everything that's happened in this format, it gives you a much better view of where a team is, because it's not impossible that if a team meets or has a favourable set of fixtures, that may push them up the division, but then they'll eventually gravitate back to where their true level is based upon the teams that they're playing in and around there. And obviously there's a little bit of interaction going on here between individual teams, but this allows you to visualize it, but also to anticipate when you think that there's likely to be a change in odds. So trading the winner market in something like the English Premiership is a sort of an odd thing to do. However, it can be quite a profitable way of actively trading, as long as you know what matches are coming up in front of the fixture list, but also how that's likely to impact the title. So we can tell immediately Liverpool's season is going to be defined fairly clearly by those away games down here and the matches against Spurs and Chelsea. And if they do all of those true to form, then that could put a different complexion on things. But nonetheless, this is a really useful way of visualizing all of the activity that's likely to take place, where teams' rightful position is within the league, and what they have left to do to catapult themselves higher or lower down the league. So when you look at this in summary, you know, both Spurs and Man United still have a fair amount of work to do. So you wonder whether they're going to challenge any higher than they are at the moment. But Man City and Liverpool is still a little bit open, but City have a slightly more favourable list of fixtures, having played most of the top teams within the league. So there you go. There's a little bit more depth in terms of how you could trade the title race.